Okay, dear, welcome everyone. So I see that people are slowly joining. We have 82 people in the room. We have this kind of webinar now. It's already third year in a row. It's very good to see that it is a very popular event indeed. We have almost 300 people who have registered for this event. And it's always very good to see such interest in Uzbekistan. It keeps growing. I will ask my colleague Shazotbek to please invite also the Ambassador Adrian to the panel, so you can do it with the. And then welcome again, everyone. And we see that Uzbekistan has been developing very quickly. We see a lot of changes which are very interesting, and of course something that happened during December as we changed the year. Almost the whole cabinet was reshuffled, and we see new ministers. We see a lot of new developments. We will try to keep a little bit housekeeping. Please, dear speakers, try to keep within the indicated time slot. Ambassador Adrian has joined us. She will also give welcoming remarks. This was not on the agenda to those who are speaking, to those who are joining us. And then Minister Kudratov has been held up at the moment with the Prime Minister's office. He will be replaced by Deputy Minister Sarvar Hamidov, and Mr. Kudratov may be joining us for the closing remarks or during the event. If he does join during the event, I will flag it and we will try to give him the floor on a short notice. So thank you, everyone. And Sarvarake Hamidov, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to participate at the Europe-Uzbekistan Business Forum. I believe that this event will act as an important tool to intensify cooperation between our business circles, as well as serve as an informative platform to raise the awareness about competitive advantages of our economies to foreign investors. Taking this opportunity, I would also like to express sincere gratitude to all the organizers and participants of today's event. Current challenges taking place in the world, including food security issues, supply chain disruption, climate crisis, require us to be creative, cooperate more actively, and combine our efforts to find new points of sustainable development. That is why I believe that the organization of today's event is relevant more than ever. Dear participants of the event, it is gratifying to know that for the last several years, the relations between Uzbekistan and the European Union have been significantly intensified in many crucial areas, including trade and investment. This positive tendency proves that both of the sides pursue similar goals, such as the creation of all the necessary conditions for the business circles to expand and strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation with each other. We're continuing to maintain strong contacts and communications at the highest and senior levels within the EU institutions, which reflects the intention of both parties to strengthen strategic cooperation. We have organized the European Union Central Asian Summit and the EU Central Asian Connectivity Conference last year, which were the first EU summits in the region of its kind. Also, the President of the European Council made his first trip to Uzbekistan, where a wide range of issues of bilateral cooperation and multilateral interaction were discussed, including our economic partnership. Last year, President of Uzbekistan, His Excellency Shavkat Mirziyoyev, visited France and Hungary, where investment contracts with total value of around $7.5 billion have been signed. It is also expected to pay visits to other European countries later this year on different levels to bring multilateral collaboration to a qualitatively new level. We're planning to organize the annual meeting of the EBRD Board of Directors this May in Samarkand and hope to see all of you participating at this important event. It is important to note that the regular visits and joint events have led to tangible results. For example, in recent years, the number of joint ventures with participation of the European companies has reached almost 1,000 entities in Uzbekistan. We have several success stories with diverse countries in different sectors. For example, privatization of the Uzbek bank, Ipoteka Bank, by Hungarian OTP. The total value of the deal is about $330 million. Construction of a gas processing plant by the German ThyssenKrupp, and the solar power plant by French Total. Saffron growing and its export to the third country by the Italian company Finopera. The project costs around $35 million. We have also held the first meeting of the Foreign Investment Council under the President of Uzbekistan last November, where 4 European companies, including Suez, Orano, Veon, EDF Group, and EBRD President, participated at the historical event. We have formed a solid investment portfolio with EBRD, French Development Agency, European Investment Bank, and other institutions. We also believe that the soonest ratification of Enhanced Partnership Cooperation Agreement with the EU will create new milestone and further serve to strengthen investment and trade collaboration between our business circles. Dear colleagues, since 2017, our country has stand on the path of irreversible reforms aimed at improving welfare of our citizens through conducting decisive measures, among which we include ensuring the rule of the law, introduction of favorable investment conditions, poverty reduction, as well as employment creation. The government's declared economic policy prioritizes the attraction of direct investments through improvement of Uzbekistan's business climate, privatization, and liberalization of foreign currency. Due to these concrete actions, we were able to achieve positive results in our economic development. Firstly, Uzbekistan was among few countries which preserved economic growth during COVID pandemic. And in 2022, demonstrated exceptional resilience in the face of strong geopolitical headwinds. According to the World Bank, our economy expects to rise around 5% by the end of this year. Previous year, we have also maintained the positive growth of about 5%. Secondly, after receiving beneficiary status of GSP Plus granted by the EU, the export of the Uzbek products has been increased by almost 45%, achieving almost $795 million. Last but not least, the Cotton Campaign collective of NGOs, trade unions, apparel brands has ended. It's a 13-year call for a global boycott of Uzbek cotton after the elimination and absence of forced child labor in the cotton sector. Just to save time, I will not go into details about our recent success stories, but want to emphasize on our new policies and approaches in our reform agenda. Today, we continue our dynamic development from a great past to a great future. Nowadays, we're building the new Uzbekistan. In this regard, we have recently adopted a new development strategy named the New Uzbekistan Development Strategy for 2022-2026. Let me briefly enumerate the main directions of the strategy, which intends to further expand attraction of private capital, strengthen investor protection, liberalize foreign trade. First, a reduction of the ministries and agencies, as well as optimization of work processes in the system of public administration. Starting from this year, the number of executive bodies in Uzbekistan have been reduced from 61 to 28. We're outsourcing a number of individual government functions to the private sector, expanding private-public partnerships and moving to digitalization within the government. We're also following decentralization of public administration and ensuring openness of the activities of government bodies. Second, reliable protection of the inviolability of property rights and elimination of illegal interferences of state bodies in property relations. Strengthening guarantees of inviolability and strict protection of private property, including rights to the ownership of land. Third, accession to the World Trade Organization as an utmost priority in our foreign trade policy. After a 15-year break, Uzbekistan has resumed its negotiations process on its accession to the WTO, and ambitious to become a member state in the near future. We intend to do so through the development of appropriate proposals to bring national legislation in the areas of technical regulation, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and intellectual property protection in line with the requirements of the World Trade Organization agreements. Fourth, continued implementation of the industrial policy aimed at ensuring the stability of the national economy, increasing the share of industry in our GDP, as well as the volume of industrial production by 1.4 times. We intend to achieve these goals through widespread implementation of programs to increase labor productivity in industries. Fifth, creating conditions for organizing entrepreneurial activity and permanent sources of income for the population, bringing the share of the private sector in gross domestic product up to 80% and exports up to 60%. These indicators can be realized through the establishment of 200 new industrial zones in the regions and development of business incubators, creating more favorable conditions for the development of entrepreneurship in areas with a difficult socioeconomic situation. Esteemed colleagues, it should be mentioned that we still have huge potential in exploring new promising areas of investment cooperation with our partners from the European countries. With an estimated population of 36 million people, Uzbekistan has the foundation needed to become a regional economic powerhouse, a dynamic, literate, and entrepreneurial population, the largest in the Central Asia, with a proper infrastructure, as well as the biggest potential consumer market in the region. At the same time, our EU colleagues have cutting-edge technologies, advanced experience, as well as the best conditions for R&D. We need to synchronize our competitive advantages and start implementing joint initiatives starting from today. We can propose different number and types of sectors for cooperation, among which agriculture, pharmaceuticals, textile and leather production, as well as green economy. We're interested in creating full-fledged high-tech productions with EU companies, signing an offtake agreement and exporting finished products to the third markets. Uzbekistan, thanks to its strategic geographic location, has an access to the Commonwealth of Independent States with more than 300 million population, which is united by free trade regime. Besides that, thanks to the transit trade agreement with Pakistan, our goods can be delivered within 3 days to another huge market, which is South Asia. All this opens up great opportunities for the European businesses to expand their presence all around the world. Dear friends and colleagues, unfortunately, the time available will not be enough to discuss all the promising areas of our cooperation. And in conclusion, I want to underpin that we have all the necessary tools to ensure successful implementation of every joint business initiative. We possess great potential in infrastructure, technology, resources, and human capital. Most importantly, we have the political will and strong support of the leadership of our country. I urge everyone to utilize all existing opportunities. We're confident that together we can raise long-term and mutually beneficial cooperation to a qualitatively new level. Taking this opportunity, I would like to invite all of you to participate at the second Tashkent International Investment Forum on this April 27 and 28, and discuss all the promising projects with you in person during the upcoming event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarvar, for your introductory remarks. And again, congratulations to this appointment, and we wish you best of luck in your new appointment. We believe that this is very good to have a young and dynamic Deputy Minister as you are. We're looking forward to working with you. Next, I will have to slightly break protocol and invite Her Excellency Nele Ihorn, a member of Cabinet of the Trade Commissioner, to speak and to give her welcoming remarks. She's worked in the Commission since 2005 on interinstitutional issues or on the policy on large-scale IT system underpinning the Schengen area, as well digital enterprise industry and transport policies. So today you are responsible for our region and especially trade, which is a very key question for many European companies also taking part and that will watch us. Please, you have the floor. Welcome.
Well, many thanks for these words of introduction and good morning from Brussels. Good morning, Deputy Minister, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak at today's business forum. It is a great pleasure to represent the Trade Department of the European Commission. Indeed, my job, I believe, is to say a few words then about EU-Uzbekistan trade framework and issues. Indeed, my apologies, I will have to leave rather promptly. So my colleague, Mr. Vičiūnas, will stay with you for the Q&A session. I'm sure there will be many questions. So hopefully you will have a very fruitful exchange. So about the trade framework between EU and Uzbekistan, indeed, it is based on 3 pillars: the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, or PCA, Uzbekistan status as a GSP plus, so GSP Generalist System of References beneficiary, as well as Uzbekistan's desire and work towards joining the World Trade Organization. So firstly, then on the PCA, so it is the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, where of course there will very soon hopefully be an enhanced partnership agreement, the EPCA, the negotiations of which have been formally concluded in July 2022. So at this moment, there is something called a legal scrubbing underway. It's a technical term to denote yet another preparatory stage for getting the agreement signed and in force. There is a legal scrubbing, there is translation and other preparatory steps to be done notably on the European Union side. So still a few steps before the agreement can be prepared for signature. The new Partnership and Cooperation Agreement will be enhanced. It will be a new chapter, if you wish, in EU-Uzbekistan trade relations as well. It will cover, as far as the trade chapter is concerned, issues to prepare a more level playing ground for investments between the EU and Uzbekistan. It will allow participation in public procurement, competition. It has provisions on dispute settlement. We have mutually agreed to reduce burden of technical barriers to trade, or DBT, to apply common rules for products that fall under sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, protect intellectual property rights. So many of these provisions are such also that require changes to the regulations and legislation in Uzbekistan. But of course, hopefully this will also help to create a more open business environment, more conducive for investments, which is also, I understand, very much the essence of the upcoming conference in Samarkand. Of course, for conducive business environment, it is important to have a rule of law in place. And on the EU side, we welcome very much Uzbekistan's efforts to fight corruption, yet another important tenet for a well-functioning open market economy. So let me perhaps say a few words also about the developments in our bilateral trade, because I think this is one of the key parts of today's discussion. Overall, trade volumes between the European Union and Uzbekistan have increased considerably in last year. So EU imports from Uzbekistan grew by 77% and are now 844 million euro. And EU's exports to Uzbekistan grew by almost 64%. So they reach now about 3.76 billion euros. So this is big increases. We can see that the GSP plus status is also delivering its share for the benefit of Uzbekistan. At the same time, we note that some of the exports are really quite anomalous. They have increased for some goods for thousands of %. So just to add here as well, of course, that as was said by the opening speech by the Deputy Minister, there are of course many changes in the overall environment due to the illegal aggression of Russia in Ukraine. Of course, the EU has also put in place to date 10 packages of sanctions against Russia, and as far as economic and sectoral sanctions are concerned, as part of their implementation, the EU is very much monitoring trade in sanctioned goods, also via third countries. So we are looking at correlations, correspondence in export data, doing outreach. So I would simply like to draw also the attention of business to this element. Going now then to the second important pillar of our relationship. As I have noted and mentioned, Uzbekistan has a GSP status. It's a beneficiary, GSP plus beneficiary, and this indeed has positively reflected in the exports of Uzbekistan to the EU. This status, what does it mean? Well, it means that there is a 0% of duty for goods that correspond to 66% of tariff nomenclature in GSP covered sectors, such as plastics or clothing. At the same time, the status depends on Uzbekistan's fulfillment of the requirements, as well as obligations that your country has taken, and these requirements are being monitored. So the first report of such a monitoring mission that the EU conducted in your country, this will be published in the spring of 23, so very soon. and this report will also then pave a way for and have impact for the future GSP status. Also on our side, just to for those that are interested to follow, there is a new general system of preferences plus there is a new regulation being negotiated by the European Parliament, by the Council. So this process is underway, and once the new regulation takes force, goes into application, there will be, of course, as always, new requirements also involved for the countries to receive the GSP plus status. Finally, and I think this is important also in this today's multilateral trade context, is to mention the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Uzbekistan is negotiating its accession. This is quite an intense and intensive process underway. The EU has been fully supportive of your accession, and we are even supporting the process by providing financial assistance through the International Trade Center. So this is simply to help you to do the technical preparations. The next working party for the accession to the WTO will take place in mid-March already in Geneva, and we really hope that this will pave way for future steps in a very positive direction. With that happy note, I would say, let me end my brief presentation. Again, thank you very much for accommodating me. Best greetings to our ambassador, and let me wish you a very, very fruitful discussion and conference today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Eichhorn. It's a pleasure to have you, and indeed it is very good to see that the European Union is moving within the expectations and in line with the interest which European business is indeed expressing towards Uzbekistan. We see a lot of activity indeed and a lot of attention paid by Uzbekistan to accelerate the WTO accession process. It is one of the really critical pillars, I believe, for economic strategy in the country today, and also, of course, indeed to see the results of GSP Plus rolling in slowly but surely. We see more and more trade. We see, of course, the Enhanced Cooperation Partnership Agreement hopefully will open a completely new door, and we are looking forward indeed to welcome the president for the signature of that event here in Brussels. Without further ado, Your Excellency Ambassador Adrian, you have been very instrumental and at the tip of this important arrow for discussion and developing the relations with the European Union. Please, you have the floor for your welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Aybek. Can you hear me?
Yes, Your Excellency.
Very well, thank you very much, and also welcome to everyone. And in fact, it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to very shortly maybe come in on, because many of the things have already been mentioned, both in fact by Deputy Minister, but also by Neil. We have, in fact, a relationship which I think over the years has developed. In particular, I would say the last very few years, and maybe let me just mention a few dates which have been mentioned, but which are important because they will also give us an idea of what we think the future, also the very near future, is also made of in terms of what we need to do to make sure that businesses and more, economic growth, in fact, can also continue. We've had, in fact, on the EU side, we've had since 2019, we had the new EU Central Asia strategy, which definitely also gave an impetus to our relationship to Central Asia and Uzbekistan, but also within, in fact, for the Uzbekistan, since President Mirziyoyev also came to power in end of 2016, we've definitely also managed to make sure that this relationship and this Central Asia, EU Central Asia, and this EU Uzbekistan relationship thrived. And why? Because one of the policies of President Mirziyoyev was definitely, first of all, to make sure that the opening of borders, making sure that, in fact, the near neighborhood policy was also in his opening up and making sure that we have a sort of a bigger market. So we're talking about Uzbekistan, but what is important here is that we have a market which is also open to its neighbors. So it's not only Uzbekistan what we're talking about, but we definitely have an opportunity to have a bigger market and a young market. Now, Aybek, you mentioned also the fact that our deputy minister is younger. We've seen now with the new government which has been the reshuffling end of the year, we've seen a government which is now, as I understand it, 10 years younger in general. So this is definitely also showing there's a willingness also to continue this dynamism that we've seen the last years. For the EU, as was mentioned by Neil, we had the granting of the GSP Plus in April 2021. And we also had the initialing of the EPCA in July last year. But on top of this, we've also had, and this is why I was mentioning the EU Central Asia strategy, we've also had the new connectivity strategy and the idea of going for a global gateway, opening up, in fact, the opportunities for Central Asia, but also for Uzbekistan to get, let's say, to find new, diversify both the connectivity, the routes, the transport routes, but also definitely also on the digital. And we also think on the water, energy, and environment. Now, what we've done on our side is to work together with our Uzbek partners, but also with, definitely Brussels working a lot on it, to see how we can, in a time of crisis, because we have to, admit that this is the war in Ukraine is a crisis, and making it an opportunity maybe to diversify, to help Central Asia and Uzbekistan diversify its routes, its corridors. So this is where we've been working. We had a big conference in Samarkand, hosted by Uzbekistan in November 2022. I think this was definitely a big event, but not only a big event, but also the start of something which we will be continuing to work on, and that's the connectivity. In this regard, we will be, in fact, the EBRD has been working, asked or tasked by the EU DG Move in Brussels, has been tasked to make a feasibility study on the transport routes. And that will be disclosed, the results of this one will be finally disclosed in May this year, because there's going to be also an economic forum, which a economic business forum in Almaty. So not in Uzbekistan this time, but also in Almaty, but definitely inviting, of course, all our partners and companies and private sector partners who will be interested to also join. And there in Almaty on the 19th and 20th of May, we will be disclosing this, but also talking about following up on what was started in Samarkand as a global gateway, starting on both on the digital and also on the environment and energy. We will be, in fact, continuing following up on this and hoping that there will be more opportunities also for businesses and definitely businesses and government to meet in Almaty. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because this is also something that we believe in. We believe that with Global Gateway, we believe that we have ODA. We are supporting 3 focus sectors. One is digital and governance. The other one is green transition. And the third one is smart and eco-friendly agriculture. We believe that this is, in fact, not enough. In fact, we need to, first of all, team up, not only team up with our partners, our Team Europe partners, our member states, but also team up with companies, with private sector, making sure that with the funding we have, the public funding, which is all grants, that we can leverage, in fact, more funding for supporting Uzbekistan in different sectors. And obviously, for having a good business environment, there is a need, in fact, for more work on the governance part. And we believe also that the digitalization is an important sector which can also help on the governance. We will have programs on fighting corruption, but we will also have programs where we work with our partners from France, AFD, on green transition. And we consider that the policy and the new program of President Mirziyoyev regarding green transition is an important one, and we'd like to support that one. And definitely also work on things like afforestation. They might not be for businesses now, but the idea is that it leads to afforestation, it leads to then into irrigation and then possibly also into agriculture. So our thinking is not only short term, our thinking is short, medium, and then long term. Our thinking is working with our partners, being the international, but definitely also our Team Europe partners, our member states who are here, but not only, also member states who are not in Uzbekistan, but also, joining us from afar, but being with us. And definitely private sector development is key. Maybe just one last thing that I want to mention, which for us is very important. We mentioned GSP+. We believe that this is a very important instrument. It's an important instrument because it gives opportunities for Uzbek businesses also to export to Europe tax-free. But it's also an important tool because it also is an incentive for implementation of all the conventions that Uzbekistan has ratified. And as was mentioned by Neil, what we know is that the system will change in the future. But we also know that the new conventions which will be added to the granting scheme, in fact, to the mechanism, in fact, Uzbekistan has already ratified them. But let me maybe end with one point, which is one thing is to ratify, another thing is to implement. And that's, in fact, not only with the conventions, this is also with all the reforms which are going on. They're not easy reforms, we know that, it takes time, it's not easy. But we also believe that this is really important, that all the efforts from the government, but also from our partners, are going in the same direction. And that is to continue, in fact, implementation of the ongoing reforms, which we believe are the right ones, and make sure also that everybody can participate in these, let's say, in the trickling down of what the reforms bring. And when I say this, it's not only private sector, we also definitely believe that civil society has an important role to play. And civil society also comes in and has shown during the COVID crisis, how important they are in supporting. And this is not only during crisis, but civil society can do a lot. So I'm just wanted to end up with this, and in fact announce also that we are having very soon with our EU Special Representative Teja Hakala, we will be having a civil society forum very soon also in Uzbekistan, and this again shows the openness and the way forward by Uzbekistan. And this is EU Central Asia Civil Society Forum. It's not the first one, it's I think the fourth one, but just showing that this is the way we would like to continue to support Uzbekistan's way forward. So we are here to support Uzbekistan. We are happy to participate in the trends and in the reforms, and we are ready to support also, of course, the private sector to participate in this. So with this, I'd like to, and again, sorry, thank, of course, I should have started with this, but thank Oybek also for all the work that you are doing in making sure that we have the opportunities to talk about Uzbekistan and what can be done for it. So with this, thank you very much. Oybek, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Adrian. It's always a pleasure to welcome you and to hear you speak. Today, the activity of the European Union delegation is staggering. It's absolutely incredible. The level of support that you are giving to practically every ministry, the number of projects that the EU is implementing in Uzbekistan, the support I mean, frankly, we are we are the only European business association covering all the countries of Europe, and the support we're getting from the EU embassy delegation is absolutely incredible. We are setting up the committees now as well, and we're happy to say that we have a lot of interest from the European companies to get involved in the discussion with the Uzbek parliament, with the Uzbek ministries, in how to advance as well the legislation, the regulatory practices, etc. Now, I want to briefly stop to thank also our partners. It would not be possible to have this kind of event on this level without them. We have the Association of European Business here. We have the AHK Central Asia. We have the Joint Chambers of Commerce Switzerland here, and Ostauschutz. Our partner, we are working very closely with the bilateral chambers from country chambers which are covering Uzbekistan, and we are very happy also to welcome them here. And I would like to just thank them for being here, for supporting us and the development of EU-Uzbekistan relations. Further, going now to the main section of our event. Of course, we have two international financial institutions representatives here, EBRD and ADB, which are doing an enormously important work in Uzbekistan. Here we have Eric Livni, who is the lead economist at the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development in Central Asia. And Eric is one of the really most recognized, I would say, economists in Central Asia today, covering Central Asia, being in Central Asia. And one maybe interesting fact as well is that from 2007 to 2018, Eric served as the president of International School of Economics in Tbilisi and advised Georgia's ministers of economic and sustainable development. We are very happy to have Eric now in Tashkent, and recently EBRD has published a new update, and hopefully, Eric, you can a little bit cover us about that. It is important data that we would like to present also to our participants here. Thank you very much, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Oybek. I could also start by thanking the EU for many years of very fruitful cooperation. Quite a number of our activities are supported by EU grants. In particular, I would mention the Small Business Development Program, which would be absolutely impossible without EU support. You mentioned my experience in Georgia, so let me provide maybe just a couple comments on what was said by previous speakers. Two of the three tracks that are being now discussed or two of the three pillars underpinning EU-Uzbekistan relationship are very familiar with me, the WTO pillar and the pillar of GSP+. These are very important directions of progress. I just want to make sure that we don't take them lightly. As Georgia discovered after 2014, it's one thing to have a GSP plus agreement in place. It's another to actually be able to take advantage of it. You have to have the goods that can effectively compete in the European market, which is not to be taken for granted. That's one point. On WTO, one has to remember again, we should not have illusions. For the moment, WTO doesn't have an appellate court, an effective functioning appellate court or appellate body, for reasons that I will not go into right now. But that prevents the WTO from exercising its function as a watchdog of competition. So I hope by the time Uzbekistan completes its negotiations and exceeds, this issue will be resolved. Okay, now let me move to my presentation. It will not be focused exclusively on Uzbekistan. I will definitely talk about Uzbekistan, but in the context of Central Asia. I hope now you can see my screen. Can you?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. So the figures that we've heard previously from the Deputy Prime Minister are well known. 5.7% GDP growth achieved last year. But you can see this is a part of a broader pattern. All Central Asian economies have been quite resistant, certainly exceeding expectations. And I must say that we are continue to be optimistic as to what's coming. 2023, we see growth rates increasing further. One positive factor that we're likely to see playing out in 2023 is a fuller resumption of tourism, which I think for Uzbekistan in particular is very, very important. Anybody who visited Bukhara, Samarkand knows exactly what I'm talking about. So 5.7 is not bad. We expect even more next year. The interesting thing about Uzbekistan, it didn't benefit as much as other Central Asian countries from the commodity prices being at a rather elevated level through much of 2022. Uzbekistan doesn't export a lot of energy, but it does export gold. So gold is definitely a factor, a very positive factor for Uzbekistan. I'll touch upon it in a moment. I have a few more trade-related slides to share. So here we are looking at some interesting dynamics, which I think have been hinted upon by one of the previous speakers. So what we see is that in contrary to expectations, all Central Asian countries have rather dramatically, I would say, increased trade. And you can see the blue bar in particular shows growth in exports. So Uzbekistan maybe doesn't really stand out here. The increases were rather moderate compared to others. So we're talking about 16% increase in exports, 21% growth in imports. But again, this is the overall figure. For some categories of goods, the increases are indeed quite dramatic. You can see Kyrgyzstan standing out in a big way in the region. Rather, to say dramatic is an understatement. It's a stratospheric increase in imports, mostly from China. And if we look at the Chinese statistics, so the numbers here come from the Kyrgyz official statistics. But if you look at the Chinese statistics, which are also available, you will see that Kyrgyz growth growth of Chinese exports to Kyrgyzstan have increased maybe much more. So maybe twice, more than twice even. Okay, so this is a part of the some sort of broader regional pattern, a dramatic increase in trade exports. For Uzbekistan specifically, here on the right, you can see the composition of Uzbekistan goods exports. So gold, you can see, is playing a very big role. It's more than 25% of goods being exported. But it's also something to note is that Uzbekistani exports are actually quite diversified, which will help when it comes to GSP plus, because it's not just about food. Food is not all food items are covered by GSP plus, but certainly textiles are, and this is something that Uzbekistan can significantly benefit from. Something that maybe we don't want to hear about so much, but nevertheless is covered by the EBRD recent paper. It's public now, so you can all look at it. There is a rather worrying trend of intermediated trade between Russia and the rest of the world, in which Central Asia is actually taking part. It's not just Central Asia, it's also other countries, and in particular countries in the Caucasus, such as Armenia and Georgia. But here I'm showing you just one bit of it. It's the increase. The blue bars are growth of imports from China, and you can look at them for all countries. So Uzbekistan is actually not so big. It's 30-something%. But then there's also a very significant increase in exports to Russia. So what countries in Central Asia do, they import again from other countries, and you will see shortly that EU is part of the trend in EU, UK. So Central Asia is importing from EU, UK, but also China and Turkey, and then exports to Russia. Uzbekistan is benefiting also from the fact that many Western companies left Russia. So, for example, we know it's still rather anecdotal evidence, but we know that Uzbekistan has its own production, for example, of home electronics, home appliances, that has dramatically increased its exports to Russia. We're talking about many millions of dollars in such exports. So it's not just re-exports, it's actually Uzbek companies using the opportunity, filling the void left by Western or Korean or Japanese producers leaving Russia. And this is the chart I promised. So this shows you the EU trade with Russia, if you wish, through Central Asia and Caucasus. So this is these are German exports. And you can see that after May of 22, you see that Germany exports to Russia drop very significantly. Essentially, they go down by 60%. And at the same time, while export to the rest of the world is stable, the green line not changing, the German exports to Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, we just look at those 4 countries, have increased rather dramatically. So the interpretation is very straightforward. And I'll show you one more slide. This gives you just a breakdown of each country among these 4. Again, we don't include Uzbekistan on the chart, but I would assure you that it's somewhat fitting this pattern. So you see Russia going down. These are German exports. Russia going down from 100% to less than 50, and everybody else go up, including Kyrgyzstan. So you start not including, sorry, Kyrgyzstan is being the champion here, and Armenia. And when you look at Kyrgyzstan on where it is on the map, you start wondering how exactly are German exports making it to Kyrgyzstan. Are they being flown into Kyrgyzstan? Are they sent by by boats. I don't know, but this is these are the facts reflected in German export statistics. Now to the macro aspects of what is going on. You see that adjustment on the macroeconomic side of things has been rather quick. And this is part of the resilience story that we've seen unfolding everywhere in Central Asia. This is well known, the facts are well known. Just put it on a comparative slide showing you a whole bunch of Central Asian countries. So we saw early on in the war a major turbulence in the foreign exchange market. All of it quieted down. And by now we're looking at a rather stable situation. Some countries like Tajikistan have surprisingly ended on top. So Tajikistan has now stronger currency. The somoni is even stronger than before the war. So it appreciated relative to everybody else. It requires a separate discussion why. But for the most part, what you see is stability, which is very important. It's very important for investors. It's very important also for any domestic business. The second very important aspect is remittances. So again, early on, there have been very, the various organizations, IFIs, IMF, whoever, everybody saw the picture in rather, in a rather pessimistic way. Everybody expected remittances to drop dramatically. This did not happen. To the contrary, we see remittances increasing everywhere. In Uzbekistan specifically, they more than doubled. We're talking about 110% growth. And that means that remittances reached 23% of the Uzbek GDP. This is what adjectives I should use. I'm not sure, but it's again dramatic, stratospheric. It's very, very significant, and of course, it's reflected on the overall performance of the Uzbek economy. Not all of it ended up in consumption. Some of this money also left the country as it paid for exports. Sorry, for imports, but it is in any case benefiting Central Asia and Uzbekistan in particular. There's also the question of whether this is likely to continue, and it is likely to continue. We looked at data on the Russian economy end of 2022. It also is rather more resilient than anybody expected early on. According to the IMF, recession was only 2.2%, and unemployment, which is what really matters for Central Asia, unemployment in Russia is at an all-time minimum currently. So there's a lot of demand for labor, and Central Asia is in a very good position to supply it. And finally, the one more aspect that is important for remittances is the relative value of local currencies. The Uzbek som and other local currencies in Central Asia, what is their relative value vis-a-vis the Russian ruble, and the Central Asian currencies have actually appreciated, which means that the value of remittances is increasing as you translate them into a local currency. Now to the next slide. Inflation is indeed the major concern in Central Asia nowadays, especially food, when it comes to food inflation, because of the very high share of food in the consumption baskets of households in all over Central Asia. But the good news is that inflation has peaked in most of Central Asian countries. The one major exception is Kazakhstan. The reason the Kazakh inflation, the dashed line, the red dashed line here, is still going up, is primarily probably has to do with the fact that the Kazakh government has too much money to spend. So it's not just the external effects of commodity prices going up, food prices going up. It's also the question of how much the government is spending. And the Kazakh government has spent a lot, in particular on increasing nominal wages. And when you give people more money, they spend it, and that translates into inflation, which refuses to go down for the moment. In Uzbekistan, the situation is better. We see now inflation in December standing at 12.3%, which is the same exactly rate is in November. So we've reached some sort of plateau, and the Uzbek central bank has already taken action to reduce the policy rate from 16 to 15%, which makes credit more available, and suggests that the central bank is less concerned about inflation, more concerned about growth, which is a good sign, and maybe even maybe function as a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. I have a few more slides to share. One of them is about, it's a good stuff. So reserves, international reserves are actually growing, and Uzbekistan is really in a very, very good situation. It has, the green bar shows you how many months of import cover Uzbek reserves provide. That's the best situation across Central Asian countries, and these reserves have also grown over 2022, not by a lot, by 2%, but 2% plus is better than 6% minus, as is the case in Kyrgyzstan, for example, or minus 22%, which is the case in Mongolia. So Uzbekistan is in a pretty good shape. And thanks to growth, Uzbekistan, and not only Uzbekistan, pretty much every country in Central Asia except Mongolia, because of strong growth, these countries see their public debt actually going down as a share of GDP. So the debt itself didn't go down in absolute terms, but because GDP is larger, as a share, debt is going down, which is good. It helps with repayment. The repayment is a major concern because interest rates going up. So you want to make sure that you keep the stock of debt at a reasonable level, and Uzbekistan is doing this quite well. The geopolitics of today are dictating a certain. Of course, there's certain challenges related to the geopolitical situation, but also some opportunities. And I would, in particular, emphasize the relocation of extremely talented labor, especially in IT, but also entrepreneurs from other countries, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, coming to Central Asia. There's actually competition among the Central Asian countries, and Uzbekistan is very much part of it. How to attract these guys and companies, and how to make them stay. China's reopening late in 2022 is a fantastic opportunity for everybody in Central Asia. Mongolia may be the most vulnerable to China's opening and closing, but it's good for everybody. And finally, what was mentioned before, now everybody are looking for alternative routes, how to transport goods in and out of Central Asia, from China to Europe, from Europe to China, and Uzbekistan is in the middle of it. It's very difficult to bypass Uzbekistan. It literally sits on the historical Silk Road. So anything that happens in the transportation space will necessarily involve Uzbekistan, and Uzbekistan should embrace this opportunity with both hands and legs and whatnot, and make sure that it contributes to the regional effort and benefits from it. The signing of the China, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan agreement is one big step forward, but there will be a lot of investment in logistics, in roads, because it's all about multi-modality. It's not just railways, and Uzbekistan, of course, will be a major beneficiary. And on the negative side, we're still looking at political fragilities in quite a number of countries in Central Asia, which translate, among other things, into inflation. When governments feel fragile, when governments feel insecure, they spend. And when they spend, they fuel in inflation, which in itself is a pretty bad thing. Now, Central Asia continues to be vulnerable to disruptions of transportation through Russia, transit. Again, here, Kazakhstan is the most vulnerable because of all 80 or 85% of its oil is going through Russian pipeline. But Uzbekistan and everybody else are vulnerable as well. And finally, we're talking about reforms. reforms in Uzbekistan. It's very much about privatization, very much about reducing the state footprint in the economy, but it's not straightforward. You know, it's not easy when you have vested interests, when you have PEPs, when you may still have corruption here and there. So this will be an issue to deal with, and I'm sure everybody knows about it, but it's not going to go away. So let me stop here. Thank you very much, and I hope there will be a discussion. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Eric. Indeed, we are moving slightly behind schedule, so I urge the next speakers to stick within the time provided. Indeed, EBRD annual meeting and business forum that will take place in Samarkand in 16 to 18 of May is one of the most important events on the business agenda, also for European companies. We are looking forward to see that event, to be part of that event, indeed. And EBRD is very much a benchmark for many European big companies as well. We monitor very closely the reports that EBRD is producing, the activity that European Bank of Reconstruction and Development is having in Uzbekistan. Basis, and we look forward again you answering maybe some questions during the Q&A. Next speaker is Begzod Jalilov, senior economist at senior economics officer at ADB in Tashkent. He's been with ADB for quite a while, and he's indeed very close to the market. He's monitoring it firsthand, and we're looking forward again to see your activity and your take on the economic outlook for 2023. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Oybek. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's great. So I will try to be very short so that we'll have more time for the interactive discussion of the questions and answers. So the key message that I want to convey here is, so that you can take, would be the growth this year will slow down per our projections. So we're talking about in the range of 4.8 to 5.2% of growth. Still, it's a healthy growth, but this growth is cooling down since 2021 after the robust recovery from COVID in the economy of Uzbekistan. So which sectors we think that they will decelerate? That would be industry and services. And while the main reasons is, of course, the prolonged Russian invasion of Ukraine that poses uncertainty on terms. Agriculture and construction growth will be more or less the same trend. That means they will edge down a bit, especially agriculture. The last year, the government of Uzbekistan, they successfully, although it was very risky to introduce liberalization of wheat market and prices, we expect that there will be lagged impact, a positive impact on the productivity of wheat production in the country this year. The growth in private consumption it's down to about 8-9%. That is also triggers another debate over how come the remittances are going up, and on the other hand, the private consumption is slowing down. We can discuss it later on. The capital investment, we expect it will a little bit rise from almost merely 1% growth last year. In terms of inflation, we should still expect high inflation. So we're talking about 10-11% for this year. Why we expect high inflation? Because the government will hopefully revitalize the structural reforms, especially the adjustment of tariffs for natural gas and electricity that will push so-called cost-pushing inflation in the country. At the same time, we expect that the monetary tightening will be continuing with a high policy rate. We talk about 15 in the range of 15 and 14% of policy rate, to contain the inflation pressure that is coming from these structural reforms. At the same time, the imported inflation pressure will be there for the medium term. The subsidies on import of essential food likely stay, as most of you know, that the household's consumption of foodstuff, the basic foodstuff, they're getting subsidized by the Ministry of Economy and Finance till December, and we think that it will continue depending on the inflationary pressure that we will see, let's say, in December and then January next year. In terms of cross-border transfers, well, the cross-border transfers will partially compensate merchandise trade deficit. So this year, according to our estimate and the preliminary data that we have received from the central bank, it was 0.6% in terms of current account deficit in terms of GDP, which is okay. We should not be so happy about it, in a way that we should carefully define what we mean by remittances or cross-border transfers. The big jump basically in reported remittances, they come from different sources, different activities that were triggered because of the Russian invasion and restrictions on capital or outflow of hard currency out of Russia. So what happened was the exporters, especially of small and medium-sized enterprises and farming from Uzbekistan, they started getting cash transfers from the importers in Russia through using the cash transfers of the bank. At the same time, because of the restrictions from the Russian government, most of the people that used to use the shuttle individuals bringing money in cash from Russia to Uzbekistan, they start using the banking system, more formal sector. So that also triggered in the accounting of cross-border transfers, a huge spike. So of course, in the BOP and the current account balance, it got reflected. So that's why we see a sudden reduction in the deficit of current account. Will it continue? Well, depending on how robustly the industry and especially manufacturing and the private consumption and services will grow in the country, in Uzbekistan this year. The demand for imports, especially for the capital and intermediary goods, will go up, basically inputs and equipment. So that will most probably will end up having about minus 1.5% balance in the current account for this year. Of course, we don't expect the sudden drop of gold, the major export commodity of Uzbekistan. And as I said, remittances, or to be more clear, cross-border transfers will be stable, will continue, somehow offsetting the trade deficit. In terms of fiscal balance, growing spending and adherence to fiscal targets are challenging for the country. So fiscal deficit, we expect about 3.5–4% of GDP. That's given that, as I said, we expect the GDP growth of 5%. So actually, this is a bit deviating from the Ministry of Economy and Finance target of 3% of GDP for this year. Why? Because we expect that there will be another spike in spending on social sector, and additional expenditure will come up, as well as the VAT drop will somehow, will deviate from this 3% target this year. Fiscal discipline, we call the authorities to stick to the fiscal discipline to make sure that, the spendings out of the budget or off the budget needs to be well disciplined, and they have to stick to the law on budget and medium-term budgeting framework. In terms of external borrowing, certainly there will be some demand for the budget support. Budget support means covering some costs of the fiscal deficit that the government will face. So we expect that the external borrowing will be, most of the deficit will be covered by the external borrowing this year as well. Thank you, and we would like to have a more interactive discussion on those matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vizodakia. Indeed, we are looking forward to discuss. Also, very short note as well. A person from Central Bank of Uzbekistan is also joining us. He's a Deputy Director, Monetary Policy Department of Central Bank. He will be available to answer some of the questions from the participants during the Q&A session. Our next speaker, Murataka Mirzayev, he's been just appointed the Director of the Uzbekistan Investment Agency. Again, you've been a very dynamic professional within the government. We've heard about you before we actually, before you were appointed as one of the really forward-thinking professionals. So you have the floor. Welcome. Just please try to keep within the designated time frame. Thank you very much.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure being here on this webinar. After all what was being said, I'm a little bit puzzled on how I would have to continue, because many things have been already touched upon and basically presented to the audience. So I would really be in the position to skip more than a half of my presentation, because basically many things have been already said. But I would like, if it's possible, I would say, even dare I to drive this meeting towards, rather from the political discussions which were prevailing so far, to doing business. I think this is more important for the agency like ours. Indeed, I was appointed just last week, and that's the first day basically I'm taking this position, because I was busy with other tasks within the ministry. My presentation was shared with the organizers. They will kindly make them available for you within 24 hours, as it was mentioned in the short chart. So let me not stop on that presentation. Basically, you will see all the figures yourselves. There are intensives shown there. There are results of the recent years of the reforms presented there, and there are basically investment outlooks which we are looking forward within the next few years up to 26. The goals are ambitious, and I agree with the ambassador Adrian that first to set the reforms, but the second is to implement them. It takes a lot of efforts. It needs time. It needs professionals. It requires professionals at first, and this is something we would like to tackle, and together with probably with European Commission, which is helping in this area a lot. But if coming back to the real economy, and here let me disagree a little bit with my colleague from the EBRD, it's not always when the government is spending it leads to inflation. And the well-known story of Busco company in Korea, where all the international financial institutions were repeating that the government of Korea should not build this factory, and they did, now has become a world leader in steel and metals production, is a beautiful story of that. And we would like now to focus really on attracting investments in the real sector of economy. And more being said, I would even focus rather on several sectors like manufacturing, like electronics, and like food production. Because in textile, well, textile is becoming now a well-known mark of Uzbekistan, as well as the fresh fruits and vegetables. But unfortunately, if you go further on, then we only have gold and some bits and pieces of other stuff, which we can openly share the market. Of course, we produce automobiles, well, but they are not sold broadly beyond the borders of this country. We do produce electronics, and that's true. There was a massive growth in exports last year. That's true. That was correctly mentioned by my colleagues from EBRD, that we tried to basically replace those who were leaving market of Russia. Well, let's take this opportunity. But what is very, very important for us is really to bring companies which will help us with the next step to develop a real sector, a manufacturing sector. Because, as it was rightly mentioned, we are pretty much rich of resources, and we do not want to continue just selling them as raw materials. One of the famous stories which was recently developing was the creation of the copper cluster, for example. You know that Uzbekistan is producing 150,000 tons per year, more or less. And now we will increase this production within the next few years up to 350,000 tons. And now let me drive the link, for example, with the policies now developing in Europe with regards to the automobile industry and car industry. You all know that the rules becoming more and more strict. You are going more and more to electric vehicles. And if I'm not mistaken, up to 2030, you will no more produce any cars with the traditional engines running on fossil fuel. This gives an opportunity also to develop businesses in Uzbekistan, manufacturing basically whatever is necessary for the car production in Europe, as well as spare parts, as components based on our natural resources base. Of course, there are many examples like this I can show, but because of the limited time, one of the very important areas is also food production, because this is where we really need a strong path of development. But when I speak about food production, I would rather say that we are eager to consider the whole chain, the whole value chain, starting from the machinery manufacturing for food production and finishing with the goods coming out from agricultural sector. This, as I mentioned, many examples like that. Our agency is standing here to basically accompany, to expedite any of the interested investors or strategic investors, even more important, because when strategic investors coming, they're coming with technologies. And one of the key elements is also to be mentioned that we really have young generation. The population of Uzbekistan under 35 is more than 60%, as you know. We have many students, and this is not only the challenge to provide them with jobs in the nearest future, but this is also an opportunity to have talented young specialists in the nearest future for new companies to be rising in Uzbekistan. So our agency is ready to help any of the interested investors of the companies which would like to discover what is about Uzbekistan. We will, as I mentioned, try to see and go along with you the whole path from A to Z. That's why we've been created, and I'm looking forward for that. And I hope European Commission will also help us to be a little bit of advertisement among those private companies who are not yet aware of the opportunities which are arising in Uzbekistan so quickly. Well, that's all I would like to say now, because as I mentioned, more of that, what I wanted to say has been mentioned already, but I'm standing here to answer any questions if they come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mirzaev. It's a pleasure again to have you, and your agency is indeed at the forefront of cooperation, one of the first contacts to be with cooperating with the companies which are entering the market. I see that the message is here that Deputy Minister will have to move to a next meeting, but we would like to have an opportunity very much to have him answer maybe at least one or two questions. Deputy Minister, I will, before I go to the questions from my colleagues, I'll have to ask you one question here from JT International. Predictable taxation is one of the key conditions for successful investment and growth in business. What is being done by the government to develop and implement long-term tax policy? Are you able to answer this question?
I will try at least. So as we know, Uzbekistan is going through, is implementing a lot of reforms. Tax system is also one of the sectors where we're trying to reshape it and make it more comfortable, more favorable towards foreign investors. This is one of the instruments, we can say, to improve the overall investment climate. As part of reforms, administrative reforms which took place right at the end of December of last year, is the merging of Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Finance, which also included in itself the State Tax Committee and the State Customs Office. We have already developed and renewed tax code. This has taken place a couple of years ago, and we still work in direction of optimizing tax environment in Uzbekistan. Doing so, while we're doing so, we are taking the best practices regionally and internationally, trying to make tax environment in Uzbekistan as clear, as transparent, and as comfortable to investors, both local and international, as possible. So answering the question, the government pays a lot of attention. This is one of the key priorities in optimizing tax system of the country.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. I would like to give the opportunity to our event partners to answer, to pose some questions to our speakers. We have Dorit Salis, who is the Managing Director of Joint Chambers of Commerce of Switzerland, here with us. We cooperate with JCC for a few years now, and I'm happy to offer you the floor to ask a question.
Thank you so much, Oybek. It's an honor to be here. This is a business webinar looking at cooperation between the EU and Uzbekistan. I'm very honored that we as Switzerland have been invited to participate in light of the fact that we are not in the EU, but very, very close to the EU and very much on track to sort of follow the lead of the EU. Concerning Uzbekistan. I would like to ask a question about privatization, the privatization process in Uzbekistan. Of course, this is of great interest also to Swiss companies, but Swiss companies being somewhat maybe more conservative and more careful, they want to understand what kind of legal underpinnings there are that are sort of underlying the privatization process. What kind of laws would safeguard their investment? I don't need a very detailed discussion of this, simply maybe to flag some key legal points. I hand this question, or I give it to the whole panel, whoever feels like they would like to answer that. Perhaps Deputy Minister or...
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. This is a very interesting theme that the government is working on. So state privatization program has been adopted by the government and in line with the instructions of our president. We have established State Asset Management Agency, SAMA, which leads the coordination of privatization efforts. We have prepared the list of state-owned assets. They are broken down into different sectors, let's say industrial entities, state-owned real estate assets, and so on. Those are being put onto privatization. They are being offered to foreign investors to be privatized through public auctions. SAMA, which is the State Asset Management Agency, is working closely with the Big Four. For example, on one of the recent deals on privatizing the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Tashkent. I think most of you have been there. SAMA has worked with KPMG. So they have supported the deal from A to Z, from structuring it and conducting the tender, collecting the offers, and through competitive bidding process, we have privatized the hotel to Abu Dhabi-based investor, actually to joint investment company, which we have established between Abu Dhabi and Uzbekistan. And there are many cases, many success stories that have already happened. And I can reassure all investors globally, especially in the European Union, whomever is interested in privatizing assets in the region, in Uzbekistan, now is the best time. We can assure you of the transparency of the process, and we can support potential investors as a single window. For example, those investors who are interested in privatizing assets in Uzbekistan, we have investment promotion agency, which Mr. Murat Mirzaev is heading and representing during today's meeting. They will literally act as a single window solution to potential investors through from identifying interests in terms of asset classes. They will help in coordinating relations with the state asset management agency, sourcing information about the market, about assets in general, and support in participating in all public bidding processes related to privatizing assets in Uzbekistan. So we urge and we welcome investor community from European Union to participate in state privatization program, and we'll be more than glad to provide abundant amount of information with regards to different asset classes. Thank you. I hope this answers your question.
It certainly does, and it certainly is also very valuable information to know where a potential investor would go as a first port of call to get all the information and guidance that they require to maybe, invest or tender for a project.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Deputy Minister. Thank you very much, Dorit. I think one of the questions here I see is for Eric, as a follow-up to your presentation. Do you believe there is grounds to assume that this spike in remittances may be causing inflation?
Well, it's definitely supporting consumption, to the extent that this is real remittances as opposed to cross-border transfers that finance something else. To say that this is causing a spike in inflation, I wouldn't go that far. First of all, we can see that the spike in inflation is in fact not there anymore. So we are beyond the peak of inflation, whereas remittances continue. And let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Eric. One of the questions that participants can still put their questions in the Q&A. You see it at the bottom of your screen. I'll be happy to read your questions. You can also raise a hand. Maybe I have one question for the EU representatives here, DigiTrade especially. We have seen from the presentations the information that you see a lot of a spike in trade through Central Asia with potentially Russia as well. Some of that possibly is also due to sanctions. Is DigiTrade doing something, or is it implementing mechanisms to monitor potential circumvention of sanctions? Because we get these questions a lot these days from business, whether there are any mechanisms. Euro-Uz does a lot of due diligence for the European companies, but I wanted just to see if there are any kind of mechanisms and processes on the EU level. Thank you. Arunas, I don't know if you're still here to answer the question. Your Excellency, maybe I can ask you if you have any information to support answering this question. Thank you.
Can you repeat it? That was a bit
Yes,
bad connection.
in the presentations we saw of IFIs, we saw also a spike in trade. We can see, of course, that is also due to the mechanisms that are being implemented between the EU and Uzbekistan, but we also see a potential risk for circumvention of sanctions, and we get a lot of questions from European business these days whether there are any systems to monitor and to prevent circumvention of potential circumvention on sanctions. And the question is whether EU has any mechanisms or is monitoring this kind of trends. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we do monitor, and as you know, we have, well, maybe not everybody, but we already had 2 sessions or discussion with our Uzbekistan authorities to see and react really to the specific cases where we can see that really the sanctioned goods were exported to Uzbekistan and re-exported to Russia. So more in general, we have appointed our envoy special for the sanction circumvention. So we will have in situ discussions with Uzbekistan pretty soon already, also in Tashkent, to discuss what can be done, how can we avoid these situations. But at the same time, it's very very simple for the, well, let's say simple for the European businesses. That's very clearly all the goods listed in the sanction regulations, and they have to be careful because it's also their responsibility that the export of these goods would not end up in Russia, even at the first destination might be benign, but relying simply on paper is not really a good thing to do. And just to remind that since a few months, European legislation has been adjusted in a way that the companies, including third-party companies, in this case, for example, Uzbekistan companies, can be listed for the circumvention of sanctions, and we listed as those who breach our regulations, and they will be they can be potentially sanctioned also.
Thank you very much. I see, Eric, you are raising your hand, so you probably either have a question or comment. Please, I give you the floor.
Yeah, it's more of a question to ourselves. The most recent package of sanctions, the 10th package, includes a provision on transit of goods through Russia. And I don't know what are going to be the implications, but one has to look at it carefully because, you know, some of the goods arriving into Uzbekistan, in fact, transit through Russia and Kazakhstan.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So I see. I see there is a question about medical products and drugs. Of course, we saw Uzbekistan. We saw some issues that Uzbekistan faced that left due to illegal, unchecked import of medical medicines. So I see. Maybe Murat, can you follow up if the government, how the government is addressing this kind of question, and whether there are any mechanisms being developed? This is also a question which is being discussed, going to be discussed within our committee for life sciences and healthcare, because many European companies are indeed have been raising this issue, but we want to see how the government is going to follow up. Please, Murat.
Well, yes, unfortunately, this is something which happened, which is unavoidable in any country. Let's be honest. And the conclusions have been made. There is a criminal case opened, and people are being prosecuted for that. I mean, this is the criminal case for sure. As for the system, it's pretty much straightforward. And that's why basically we found out who were responsible for these illegal actions. I just have to say that there is a strict division between our ministry and the Ministry of Health today, because the Agency for Pharmaceutical Industry was completely transferred towards, is now located within our ministry. And one of the deputy ministers is responsible also for development of the pharmaceutical industry. And all which is related to acceptance regulations and needs in particular drugs is left with the Ministry of Healthcare, which is obvious. They have to take care of the healthcare, and we basically are responsible for industry. So, yeah, let's speak on the bright side of the story. We are currently, by the way, developing a possibility. It's not yet there, though it was accepted already at the highest level. We would like to introduce mechanisms also to introduce offset contracts for those drugs which are particularly important for Uzbekistan. And that gives an opportunity also for possible investors to develop their businesses with much less risks, because then you can really be sure on the side when you calculate the money flow and the cash flow. So these opportunities are being developed and many others. So if there is an issue about how to enter the market with the possible pharmaceutical project, you are most welcome. We will help you in that and be quite open and transparent in terms of sharing any information which is available and needed for that. So that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. We are slightly over time, but maybe I will take the liberty to take one last question, because it's not often that central bank is allowed to join this kind of events. So I see here Eldor Zakirov. I would like to take an opportunity maybe to give you the floor to give us the concluding outlook that Central Bank of Uzbekistan sees for the results of 2022 and of course the outlook for 2023, especially in terms of inflation. And maybe you can share some insights on things that you have published the report, but maybe you can share something beyond that if you're allowed. You have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Before about the outlook, I just want to make a small contribution to the question about remittances. Actually, in terms of those remittances, which was mentioned, roughly slightly below than 17 billion. We need to mention that there are significant portion which became not a kind of consumer remittance, but it became kind of there are some factors that drove these huge remittance. One is the informal channels became formal. Second important factor played role in a small expert earnings came in the form of the remittances rather than the bank transfers in 2022, as well as some of our kind of regional countries like the Tajikistan and Kyrgyz Republic. They had issues with the cash FX, so some migrants from those two countries who are working in Russia, they send their remittances to their countries, so Uzbekistan, in order to accept the cash. So when we are analyzing its impact to the overall consumption, aggregate consumption, and the inflation, we are trying to deduct some portion, something like 20-25% of this portion, and then take into consideration how much it impacted. Of course, it impacted to the boost of the consumption as well as the inflation, and it will sustain for some time. So the central bank, together with the government, will take measures, both the tightening the monetary conditions as well as ensuring the aggregate supply within the economy in order to sustain these demands. In terms of the inflation dynamics, as already mentioned, that we already went through the peak, and we are expecting it to decline. January inflation was annually 12.2%, and we are expecting this one to decline something roughly around 9% by the end of the year, and achieving the 5% inflation target next year, because this low and stable inflation will also allow the investors to make their plans and contribute to the macroeconomic stability of the economy. The economic growth last year was, as mentioned, 5.7%. For this year again, we are expecting it to be around or slightly above the 5% in a real terms. Of course, the conditions like the external conditions will play a role there. A kind of a global recession or the global prices of the major commodity that we are exporting. But overall, the conditions which was expected in the beginning of this geopolitical situation in February last year was rather negative. But beginning from second quarter, we are seeing the positive trends in terms of the huge remittances, in terms of the increased export earnings. The external trade growth was very much significant comparing to the expectations when this geopolitical situation happened. So overall, we are expecting the kind of for the next 3 years, at least 5% of the economic growth together with the decreasing trend of the inflation. So kind of would be a much more beneficial environment in terms of the investment.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Since we are completely out of time, I would like to thank everyone again for participating in this event. I'd like to remind that this is part of our series of meetings with Uzbekistan's members of cabinet. So we intend to have on the 23rd of March, we have a meeting together with the Minister of Digital Technologies and hopefully Minister of Agriculture within in April. The announcements are made within our newsletter, which I do recommend to subscribe to. Around 4,000 organizations do receive it worldwide, and we try to keep as many events as possible open. Again, our dear speakers, thank you very much for your time that you took to participate in our event, and all the attendees, again, thank you very much. All the presentations will be made available via email within 24 hours. Thank you and have a nice afternoon or evening wherever you are.